Hello, and welcome to the second installment of the Tricks of the Trade series, where we examine various elements from games in the fighting genre to reach a better understanding of competition and the path to mastery. Each person has their own journey, and my hope is to encourage a more creative approach instead of relying on established conventions, empowering players to think outside the box, which is why I mostly choose to explore the more unconventional tactics and techniques, like today's example, which comes from Garou, Mark of the Wolves, a game universally praised and remembered fondly as the SNK version of Third Strike.
SNK's answer is
Garou,
Third
Mark of the Wolves, is the SNK equivalent of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. It has reverse parries called Just Defending. It's a really good game. Great art style, too. So thank you very much, Best L Bright. $20 tip. I really
But paradoxically,
I need that money. I really
without the large player base. Please check out Kota's guide in the description for a deep dive into the system mechanics. But very quickly, without getting too detailed, the game engine features low jumps, universal overheads, universal anti-airs, feints, and feint cancels, break cancels, similar to focus cancels in Street Fighter 4, but only for certain specials, guard breaks, the top system, where you select an area on your life bar that grants you bonus damage and access to a unique move. And finally, this game marks the origin of Just Defend, a mechanic most players were first introduced to with CVS2. However, in Garou, Mark of the Wolves, you'll find the mechanic much more lenient. When Just Defend is activated, there is a short window in which you can choose to input a special, or super, granting a guard cancel out of block stun. The focus of this volume is the Shoto-esque character, Marco Rodriguez, also known as Butt. He has all the hallmarks of a Shoto, a fireball, hurricane kick, and a DP, which doubles as his break attack, with the addition of 2 command dash counters. But there are 2 tap-style special moves that are often ignored. In this volume, we will examine Ryu Senken and Kosenkyaku, their application and place in a true competitive environment. Both Ryu Senken and Kosenkyaku have 4 level variations, which increase in power as you hold the corresponding button to charge. They function identically when it comes to charge time, level gains, and damage, with 3 in-game seconds for level 1, 5 seconds for level 2, 8 seconds for level 3, and 16 seconds for level 4. Ryu Senken is performed by holding, then releasing C after the given time. The animation is a dash punch, similar to Makoto's Hayate from Third Strike. It has a fast startup for the distance and speed in which it travels, with the added benefit of a slightly disjointed hitbox and knockdown properties. When charging Ryu Senken, you forego the use of all actions done with the C button. This means that in addition to the C normals, you lose access to some important tools, like the C Fireball, C DP, Feint, Top Attack, and the ability to grab With the loss of the grab, you might assume that it gives the opponent free rein to apply throw pressure. But don't worry, you can still tech with the D button. The way Garou, Mark of the Wolves, handles inputs allows you to press a light and heavy button simultaneously. The light attack will take priority, while still maintaining the throw tech properties. This can be done while holding down back. Street Fighter players may find this familiar as a crouch tech option select. At -9 to 11 frames on block, it can be easily punishable if not spaced right. However, if it connects meaty at the tip of the hitbox, the pushback can make it difficult for the opponent to retaliate successfully, and in some cases, it'll be completely safe. So make sure to learn the spacing for each version, as they have different travel ranges. At 12 frames, the level 1 Ryu Senken has the second fastest startup of all variations, which makes it useful for guard cancels up close, or as an anti-air. It's also effective against cross-ups, as the guard cancel release requires no directional input, granting an autocorrect. Level 1 is one of the 3 variations that can be hit confirmed by light chains, using a technique called renda canceling.
Okay, this is what you've been waiting for, the strategy section.
If you're unfamiliar with this piece of fighting game lingo, a renda cancel, or chain cancel, is a technique that has its origins in pre-alpha Street Fighter games, where it wasn't normally possible to cancel into specials from a light chain. This is also the case in Garou, Mark of the Wolves. To circumvent this limitation, it was discovered that it's possible to car cancel the last normal in the chain with the desired special. When applied with all versions of Ryu Senken except for level 3, you now have a guaranteed knockdown combo off a hit confirmable light chain. Level 2 is still viable as a close range guard cancel, albeit with slightly more risk due to the extra frame of startup. As your charge increases, so does the travel range, making it an effective tool for landing combo extensions. Levels 2 and up are effective as fireball punishes due to their travel and ease of use with the simple command of releasing a button to perform a guard cancel after a JD. Garou,
Mark of the Wolves,
has an infamously lenient buffer timing, which often interferes with your execution, as it holds the inputs for some time. The minimal action required for the release is a big asset to mitigate the leniency problem.
I mean, you're gonna be going to. Ooh, the guard cancel.
The long startup of the level 3 Ryu Senken prevents it from being used effectively as an up-close guard cancel, like the lower level variations. This also means that some combos are no longer possible, such as the Renda chain, or juggles that start too low, but it makes up for this weakness with a far travel, high damage, and pokes, or whiff punishes, increasing your effective range to deceptive levels. Some might argue that the fireball fulfills this role, which isn't incorrect, but the variable spacing of these situations won't always secure offensive momentum, as the fireball loses its knockdown properties and a bit of damage when at range. And not to mention the superior positioning of a successful Ryu Senken. That being said, don't discount Marco's fireball. It's the best in its class when it comes to projectiles. And finally, charging to level 4 upgrades Ryu Senken into a full screen, high damage, multi-hitting attack, with all the utility of the lower level variations, thanks to the 11 frame startup. Fighters that include universal invul frames on backdashes will often see them being used as a defensive answer to an okizeme or pressure situation, especially at lower levels. As Garou, Mark of the Wolves, falls into this camp, it's important to keep an eye out for these interactions. Historically, the most common way to deal with the backdash is with a pursuit attack. Fortunately, the level 4 Ryu Senken, with its full screen travel, fast startup, and simple command, fits the requirements for an easy reactionary punish, as long as you're keen. Kosenkyaku is an active flying kick with knockdown properties, utilizing the D button for its charge. All level variations of Kosenkyaku have a startup of 14 frames and share the weakness of whiffing on crouching opponents, with one exception. This makes it less reliable as a guard cancel, though it still functions in some situations. As with Ryu Senken, the general rule is to aim to connect at the tip of the hitbox, making it more difficult to punish. Charging Kosenkyaku will occupy the D button. However, it is somewhat less of a sacrifice compared to charging Ryu Senken, as the only special move that uses D is a situational attack at best. The main drawback would be the loss of the jumping D and sweep. At level 1, Kosenkyaku travels at a slight angle and hits up to half screen. This variation is unique, as the angled drop maintains its active frames for a short time and will hit crouching opponents. If spaced to connect media at this point, it's possible to end up with a slight frame advantage, making it a perfect situation for a JD into guard cancel setup or DP break. This optimal distance can be measured near the tip of Marco's standing B. As a bonus, the airborne frames will traverse over grounded projectiles. You can also use the active frames for meaty okizeme options, so be sure to experiment with setups that work for you, but don't get too predictable. Levels 2 and 3 are rather underwhelming when compared to the utility of the level 1 variation. As with Ryu Senken, there is a travel and damage gain with every level, but unfortunately the distance increase for Kosenkyaku is not as significant. Minus all the standard uses of the release, the long startup and low travel speed make it difficult to use as a guard cancel. However, the space covered when active means it has some use as a juggle extension or far anti-air, which is especially useful against characters with aerial attacks that lock them into a set pattern. And because counter hits cause a juggle state, landing a counter hit Kosenkyaku leaves you in an ideal position to follow up with a high damage extension. Level 4 is similar in utility to levels 2 and 3. Although it still has the long 14 frame startup, it has a decent travel distance and covers a critical section of the screen. With less recovery, at -6 on block, level 4 Kosenkyaku is somewhat safer than levels 2 and 3 when spaced properly. It should also be noted that both level 4 variations include a particle and shaking effect that adds slowdown to the already strained Neo Geo hardware. This can be taken advantage of, as it becomes more difficult for your opponent to reliably JD the attack or perform a guard cancel. Overall, you'll often find that the versatility and quick charge time of the level 1 variation is too good to pass up when compared to holding charge for the higher levels. It's possible to hold both C and D to charge Ryu Senken and Kosenkyaku simultaneously. Having access to both charge attacks is very powerful and can lead to some interesting setups. Although it's quite a sacrifice to lose both buttons while you charge, Marco is more than capable with just A and B. Just be careful when you decide to use it, and know when to abandon your charge. You still have a projectile, the evasion attack, Harai counters, and most importantly, the ADP break. It can't be overstated how integral the simplified command is to the effectiveness of Ryu Senken and Kosenkyaku. Easy special inputs have always been a topic of debate within the FGC. The general consensus being that they should be carefully balanced. Garou, Mark of the Wolves, is not a balanced game. A slightly more advanced method to utilize guard cancels is to use the JD input as part of the buffer of the desired special. Here are some examples. Working these inputs into your neutral game requires a certain level of foresight, as the buffer speed can shift based on many variables. There are also many points in these execution sequences where you're vulnerable, especially if you're attempting to guard cancel through a multi-hitting attack. Because the charge release is only one input, the JD attempt itself essentially is the guard cancel, leaving your controller safely in the block position as you release the button. This allows you to focus more on reacting instead of on the execution of the guard cancel, lowering the risk of an unintentional attack if the guard cancel is not successful, as a button release yields no output. A good example of this is in the use of Marco's evasion attack. The evasion attack, 2AB, functions as a universal anti-air for most characters due to its invulnerable upper body frames. This can be used to blow through certain setups or disrupt pressure. During these sequences, it's ideal to buffer a special, as the evasion attack, although cancelable on hit and neutral on block, leaves you at a massive -6 if you manage to land it without the cancel. Unfortunately, the slow startup, short cancel window, and unwieldy buffer system requires a certain amount of prediction as to when the evasion attack will hit. Which brings us back to the advantage that the charge release offers. The simple command allows you to maintain the block position while still attempting the special cancel. Additionally, there is no risk of getting an unwanted special from accidental inputs, because again, the release can only yield the charge attack. Now that we've gone over the practical applications, one might ask, why bother? Is it just a gimmick? And what is the sheathed sword? To find out, let us first look at an example on the other side of the coin. The opposite of the sheathed sword is the brandished sword. Kevin's P-Power version of the Super, Gatling Freezer, has a 0-frame startup, is plus on block, and leads to very heavy damage if it connects. This makes him extremely dangerous when his meter is filled, and you must be wary of every interaction to avoid getting hit. This gives him more freedom to attack, as he knows you'll be on the defensive. The same concept applies when you see a Guile charging. They're showing their hand of not only the intention to throw the sonic boom, but the ability to perform the move at all. The idea being that you're forced into situations because you know what options are available to them. All warfare is based on deception. When we're able to attack, we must seem unable. Indirect tactics are inexhaustible. Learning such tactics, even those considered to be suboptimal, doesn't change the fact that you're still increasing the number of options for yourself. Demonstrating that you're willing and able to perform these actions will prompt your opponent to widen their scope of possible threats.
2 unidentified targets required.
Central, we have 2 unidentified targets. No,
New target.
Which will create potential openings as their mental energy is spread thinner. The most valuable aspect of this, ironically, is the fact that you can increase mental load by not acting. After going over all the potential ways Ryu Senken and Kosenkyaku can be used, you may notice that there are some situations that cause hesitation in your opponent once revealed, like the meaty level 1 Kosenkyaku, or the ability to easily counter a fireball with a guard cancel Ryusenken. These are now elements that the opponent needs to be aware of, leaving them with the knowledge that you have no qualms about using these techniques should the situation present itself. This is the concept of the sheathed sword, and it applies twofold here. 1. The charge, unlike a directional charge like Guile, is much more difficult to detect and can be hidden in a variety of ways. This is when it becomes dangerous for the opponent to assume when you're charging, or not. The self-inflicted limiting of your moveset can tempt them into trying to take advantage of the situation, making choices that they normally wouldn't, and ignoring Marco's powerful base kit. And 2, in a more meta sense, the unconventional nature of the approach can be useful when you need to switch it up on a dime. Even just the knowledge that it exists can give one pause. It may seem counterintuitive to attack with a suboptimal technique, but it's always important to keep your opponent guessing. Fully optimized play can be predictable, as an experienced player will be much more sensitive to this approach due to the frequency of exposure, which means increased neural connectivity to the actions needed to counter this play. Unorthodox attack vectors are one solution to this problem. In the end, it's simply better to have the capability and understanding of how to use these techniques than not to. Just a small piece of the puzzle, demonstrating your mastery of the game.
Pick the top tier, and you know I'm the most prideful motherfucker there is, yo. Yeah. If I pick the top tier, just pick a top tier. You wanna win, yo? Pick a fucking top tier.
This sounds simple, but we can often feel pressured into sticking to a prescribed meta, or preconceived beliefs, and best practices, whether it be due to the fear of embarrassment, or the allure of conformity for acceptance. A quote from the great philosopher, David Serlin. Playing to win involves exploring. It involves trying several different approaches in a game to see which you're best at, which other players are best at, and which you think will end up being most effective in the end. focus on your own context.
Is efficient in close quarter, but don't make a plan of it. That is a very good way to lose your...
There's so much to remember.
If you try to remember, you will lose. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. Put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or creep or drip or crash. Be water, my friend.
There's nothing I can do. I can't do anything about that whatsoever. I can't do anything about it. Why can't I play Garou Mark of the Wolves?